Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my session today. My name is Chris McManus, and I'm with HotelTonight. I'm here today to talk to you about how to get stakeholders in bed with your data. And like today, I know a little bit about getting people into beds, or at least hotel beds, from 14 years of working in the travel industry. The last 3.5, I've been working for HotelTonight. If you're not familiar with HotelTonight, it's a really fantastic last-minute booking app. You can actually book about 100 days out, but our real focus is in the last minute. So we have a really fantastic sales team that goes out and works with our hotel partners to really get the absolute best inventory and deals for the last minute. For instance, I got tonight at this hotel, just booked it this morning for about $250, which was a lot better than the $499 that was a few days ago. So the way we always sell our app is that it is one of the first mobile-first and streamlined apps, and it's only 3 taps with swipe and takes about 10 seconds to book a room. So it's really easy, and one of the leaders for really just having a nice streamlined booking experience. So considering that I work for this company that we have this big sales team who need to act really fast and really get deals as they're about to expire, because once we hit midnight, you can't sell that room anymore. So they have to act fast. So it's really important that when we build tools for them, that they are really highly actionable and that we provide for them immediately the data that they really need to be able to do their job well. So that's been my role at the company. As a data product manager, I've spent the last 3 years building out sales tools for the teams. Now, the first sales tool I ever built for the team when I first started, our COO and the head of the sales team approached me and asked me to build a dashboard that would help them get their hotel partners engaged to give better rates. So I took their advice on what they wanted and what they were looking for from the team, and I went and sat down and built what I thought was a really fantastic dashboard. Unfortunately, when I then handed it over to the team and said, here, use this, they wanted no part of it. They were not interested. They were just averse to change. They wanted to stick with the old tools they were comfortable with. And it was kind of just a big flop. So we decided to start over and take a different approach. And that's what I'll be talking about today, is some of the best practices that I learned throughout that process when I kind of started over and really involved all of my stakeholders in the design process. So we're going to start off talking about truly identifying your stakeholders and whose voice really should matter when you're actually building your dashboard, as well as moving into best practices in design and discovery, as well as building a sustainable dashboard. And then finally, of course, your rollout strategy and the life after the release. At the end, I will be available up front, offline, to take and answer any questions at the very end. So, identifying your stakeholders. As I mentioned before, you have a couple different stakeholders. You have your top-level leadership, you have your team managers, and then you have the team members themselves. And the interesting thing about them is they all kind of want something different. If you ask them what they want in the dashboard, they're all going to give you a very different answer. And so as you're going through this, you need to, A, build a dashboard with absolutely everything under the sun on it, and then you're going to end up with basically way too much, something not very useful, and as this guy's saying, probably you're going to want to go to the bar or hit the liquor store rather than actually use this actual dashboard. So the important thing is to go and figure out who is that stakeholder and what do they want. So all 3 of those groups that I just mentioned truly are stakeholders. Of course, the top-level leadership. They're going to want to know, how is the overall business doing? How is what you're building going to help our bottom line? The managers, they're focused on the performance of their team. They're really caring about the actions that their team members are taking and making sure that they're doing what they want. But really, at the end of the day, the end user of your dashboard is going to be the actual team members and sales team members, especially themselves. And so that's where I always like to say you want to take control. Build for the end user. That's truly what's going to drive the success. And their voice is actually almost in some points more important than what maybe a top-level leader would want to see on the dashboard, because they're the ones doing the work at the end of the day. And truly, if you've done this correctly, high utilization rates of your dashboard, if it is built and designed in a way that truly drives action, is actually going to then end up, of course, driving the results and the success that that top-level leadership is looking for. So in the end, working with all of those user groups and looking at them all as stakeholders, including even the lowest level of your sales team, is truly important to understand how to build the best dashboard possible. So now let's get into actual design and discovery and building this dashboard out. First thing that's important is to get a roadmap in place. What I mean by roadmap is a timeline, really being transparent from the very beginning with what is the expectation of the amount of time that you plan to take for each phase of development. So being transparent of, I want to spend a solid month talking to users and making sure that I have a full discovery period to ensure that I know all the data that people are looking for and all the actions that the team managers are looking for them to take, and being able to really correlate that data. Then from there, give yourself a solid estimate of how long you actually plan to build the dashboard, and then also a period of time for rollout strategy. Having those timelines signed off on up front by the managers, and especially top leadership, will really help when you do actually take that time to keep them from pressing you to release something sooner than it's perhaps ready. So moving into discovery. Discovery is very important, that you want to discover together. This is your opportunity to work with your sales team and really find out what they want. Basically, you kind of have this big win. Often when you're building a product for a consumer, it's kind of hard to get consumers in to try your product and ask them questions. You have to actually pay them in a lot of times to come in and give answers. You're already paying all of your sales team, so you can take up their time. It's worth it to bring them in and actually get them involved in user groups. It's important also, as you're doing this and setting up your user groups, that you're doing a nice diverse mix of user testing. And this means from the highest level, most senior tech-savvy members of your sales team to the newest, maybe coordinator level that just got out of college and isn't very tech-savvy. You want to make sure you have that spectrum as you're moving forward and getting that feedback. It's also important if you have a diversified sales team like myself that is spread out across the world. So we have a lot of offices in Berlin, Paris, London. I actually went and did user testing when I was building sales tools with those groups as well. Because you'd be surprised how little tiny errors like hard coding a $ into a dashboard can be very problematic when you're working with teams that are in other countries. So once you've done this discovery, beyond actually just doing the discovery period, this doesn't mean you get all the answers from them and again, you go and sit down and build that dashboard. The worst thing you can do is work in isolation. You want to make sure that you're involving your users throughout the entire process. So let's focus a little more on some of the questions that you want to ask the team and how you want to get them involved. As I mentioned, top-level leadership, they're kind of who you might want to press back on the most and have them involved in the actual physical build the least. But you do want to make sure you understand one prime question from them, which is, what is the primary goal or metric that they're really looking to drive home here? Is revenue, at the end of the day, all that they want to move, and everything else they're not so concerned about. Just make sure that you have this truly set in stone, and that's what you're building to at the end goal. From there, you want to approach the managers, find out, okay, what actions do you want your sales team to take? What is it you're looking to come out of this? And from there, does that correlate with what that leadership goal is? And make sure that that's in line. Because that's a battle you want to have them fight out before you actually start building anything, and make sure everybody's on the same page. Then you have the opportunity to talk to team members. And this is where you want to ask the most amount of questions, and not just about the data. Of course, it's important to find out, what data are you looking for? What are your, for us in our case, what are your hotel partners asking for? What are they dying to see to help them drive decisions? But also ask them about how they interact with other tools. Which ones are you using that you actually like so far? Which ones do you hate? Which one makes you want to throw your laptop out the window? Because we all have that one. And really take lots of notes. Be as curious as possible. Find out as much data. You're going to get a lot of ideas. It's okay. Pretty much everyone's going to throw opinions at you. Take note of them. You're not going to use all of these ideas in the end, but at least it's better to start with a larger pool and pare down after that. And that's the next step, is now that you have all this information, you really want to start setting up and connecting data points with direct actions. So an example of how I did this at HotelTonight was when I was building a tool for our hotel partners. We wanted to just design a report that we could give to hotel partners that they would be able to look at, and we had some actions that we wanted them to take. Give us more inventory, lower a rate, turn on one of our geolocations. And so we went and we talked to the hotel partners and said, what data do you want? And they asked for everything under the sun. So then I brought a mixed group of people from our data science team, people from our product team, and as well as people from our sales team into a conference room. And what I did is I put up on the wall, just visually, like big sheets of paper that had each of the different asks that we wanted. So lower rates, add more inventory, turn on promotions, all these different asks, and I put them around the room. And I printed out a list of all the data points that people had asked for, and I gave everyone a sheet of paper. And then I gave them Post-its. and said, I want you to walk around this room and look at the ask and scan through what you have here for data points. And if you think a data point here can actually support this ask and help drive that decision, then put the post-it on the wall. What we ended up with in the end is, as you looked, there was a lot of questions that we had tons of data to support, and there was a bunch that we didn't have much of a story for with the data that the people wanted. We had other data that we knew could support it, but it wasn't what the hotelier wanted. And by connecting their need and their desire with our request, has a lot of strength to it. So that was kind of step one. We still had a lot, though. So the next important part is to set priorities. I think I just got this stuck. Go that way. Sorry. There we go. So you want to set up priorities. So at this point, I took the 25 people and said, great, now that you can see what we have here, walk around the room and I want you to prioritize 1 through 5, which of these asks is the most important to you? Which do you think will drive revenue the most? Which do you think the leaders really want you to take? And everybody voted. Of course, that's a small user group. I want to diversify how many people are involved in this process and make sure that all of my sales team felt heard and felt like they had an opportunity to get involved in this process. So I just took quick pictures with my phone of every one of these options, set up a quick spreadsheet, and emailed it out to the team and said, okay, got till Friday, vote. What's your priorities? And so at the end, when we had pared down and decided to only have 5 asks, and that's what we were going to focus on for this particular report, it was something that was based off of all of the team together, putting a vote, and I did this thing again. And we were transparent about why we made that decision to cut out other options. So that was a really huge thing for the team, because they were like, okay, I get it. We didn't add this user data that we really wanted because it just didn't make sense and it didn't correlate with what we were trying to achieve here. And so instead of feeling hurt or unheard, they actually felt like it made sense. So that transparency is going to go a long way, especially in the end when you roll out the dashboard, to make them feel like they've been part of it. Now, once you have all these data points connected, again, not quite yet ready to go jump into your Tableau session and start actually designing the dashboard. I always highly recommend that you really stop and take the time to get in there and do some whiteboarding out of your designs. Give a couple of options. Utilize that same resource of, if you can't get people in the room with you, take a screenshot of your whiteboard, send it around, get feedback on the actual design itself. Because as important as the data on your dashboard is the type of visualizations that you choose to make for your team. I have some team members that are extremely visual. They really just want to see charts, and they want to see line graphs that show back trends over the last 2 years. They can see how their numbers are doing. I have others who are like, don't give me that. I just want to download and put it into Excel, and that's just how my brain works. I want nothing to do with your situation. So I ended up actually with one of my dashboards that I built for the team, which is all of our retro data. I literally have kind of the exact same tab twice, and it's like one is all graphs and charts, and the other one's like tabular form, and it's just the numbers. And it's by having both of those there, I suit all the users' needs, and it actually wasn't that hard to create anyway, because you just duplicate the tab and swap out the format. So it's very important to take that time and really understand who's your user, what do they want, what are they going to actually use, and what are they going to respond to. Now, once you've done all of this, now you're ready to build. It's time to get in there. So moving on from here, I'm going to get into some best practices for building a sustainable dashboard. So sustainability, what I mean by that for a dashboard is there's really 2 sides of it. You roll out a dashboard, often right in the beginning, you're going to spend time to have a bunch of sessions teaching everybody how to use your dashboard. However, you probably don't want to do that every time a new hire comes on board. That can get a little crazy. And especially if you work with tech sales teams like I do, there's a lot of turnover. They tend to switch jobs like, every 6 months to a year. So that being said, you want to make sure you build something that's user-friendly, that's set up for success as business needs change, but also that is self-serving for the user, that they're able to ask their own questions and truly understand how to use the dashboard. So that's the one side of it. The other side of sustainability is, hopefully, if you've built this fantastic dashboard that everybody's taking action on and you've really increased revenue and people can see the impact of it, maybe you get a promotion. So the last thing you want to do is be maintaining this dashboard after you've left and moved on to another role. So we're also going to dive into some best practices for building a dashboard that you can pass along to another member of your team should you move on out of your role. Or if you just take vacation and something goes wrong on it, which is another thing that obviously happens from time to time. So, moving into best practices. First and foremost is thinking about when you're building your dashboard. As I mentioned, obviously business needs change. At the beginning of an organization, when you have maybe smaller teams, some of our sales team, they used to manage like all of East Coast. Like that was a thing because there was like 5 sales reps when HotelTonight started. Now we have 200, so we have Boston, or we have people just have a portfolio of particular hotels. So it's really important to think of the granularity of the data and the way you're setting it up as you're building out your data sets to actually build the dashboard. If I initially aggregate everything up to, East Coast and pull in all my data that way, eventually when we hire more team and we separate out, this dashboard's useless. I'm gonna have to go over and start from scratch. So it's really important to start at the lowest level of granularity that you possibly can. So for me, that's to bring all the data down to the hotel level, because that's really as low as it's ever gonna go. However, if you're doing this, different types of data is gonna have different levels of granularity naturally. For instance, for our world, and we're gonna look at a double-sided marketplace. So we have our users, which we care about our user interaction on pretty much the day level. We have 1 million people who come in and click the app 15 times in a day because they're just not sure, because it's last minute. Do I want to book it? Maybe I'll wait an hour. Maybe I'll book it. Maybe I won't. We don't really care if they came in the app 50 times. We care that they came as a user once that day. So that aggregation's to the daily level. However, for bookings, I want to see that by hour because I want to know like what's happening right now. Has something happened on the app? Is it crashing? What's going on? So that's a very different aggregation. So it's important that when you have these different levels, it's okay to bring them in, but you need to keep your data sets separate. So I will use a completely separate data source and then not tie them together either, because I know it's always, if you look there, you're like, oh, well, they've got a lot of the same attributes. I'll just tie them together. No, because they really shouldn't be blended. At the end of the day, their aggregations are very different level. You can if you're using it for a filter, but I always recommend beyond keeping it separate in the data sources, to also keep it separate in the actual dashboard itself. So I'll just put any of that data on a completely separate tab. So it's, we'll have bookings on one, conversion on another. Keep them separate because they are at different levels. So from there, obviously granularity. Granularity can mean a lot of data on your dashboard. So this is where you want to think about your design. So there's a lot of really great features, obviously, in Tableau that can help make granularity a lot cleaner. Of course, using hierarchy. I try to use this as much as possible because it's very easy to allow the user to roll up or unroll to the exact level of granularity that they're looking for. That also allows you to bring in, obviously, using filters. And so, for instance, for my dashboard for my team, one of the reasons why I built our retro dashboard is we used to use another tool called Looker. Looker's great for if you want to go in and pull a quick query and say, how did my numbers do yesterday? Problem is it attaches directly to Snowflake. And so I had 200 sales members running the exact same query roughly 2,000 times a day. And so it was costing us a lot of money. So instead of using that, what we switched over to do is to build one Tableau dashboard that pulled in all that information and pulled it in for everybody. And then we just made them all sit down for half an hour and build out views for their particular regions and just set that up in advance, save them for themselves, and then they were able to actually just go in, click on their view, and see their numbers from yesterday. So it actually ended up saving the company about $50,000 a year to have one query run once a day for everyone in the company in comparison to having thousands of queries being run all day. Because especially sales members, they tend to get a little antsy of like, I want to know right now, and they used to literally just like click that button like every 45 minutes running another query. They didn't realize it actually was costing the company money every time they did that. So not the same when we're looking at Tableau. So next important thing, I didn't address what's down there on the bottom. If you are adding very low levels of granularity, you want to make sure that you're including this in your actual calculations. Using fixed level of detail calculations is really helpful to ensure that as you roll up and unroll your dashboard and change the views, that you're actually going to end up having the correct numbers at the end. So obviously, as you're doing this, the first thing you want to do is audit your numbers. Make sure that what you have on your dashboard matches any other sales tool that this team is using, and that it's actually correct as well, of course. But this is probably the #1 way that sales teams will not want to use your dashboard, is if they see anything that looks even remotely different than what they see on another one. If it is different, just holistically, because maybe it's at a different level of aggregation or you're refreshing it on different cadence, just make very clear to call that out on the dashboard itself and add a little text box saying, this is refreshed hourly, and that other dashboard say this is refreshed every 4. That way people are really clear to understand if there is a difference, why that's happening, and that it's okay. Beyond making sure the numbers are aligned, it's also very important that you're using naming conventions that are aligned. This is probably one of the biggest missteps I've seen looking at and auditing people's dashboards, as you'll see that they'll call conversion on one dashboard, and then they'll call it supply conversion on another dashboard. And people are like, what's the difference? What's the calculation there? What's going on? Make sure that if you're using the same metrics, that it is the same. Also to that note, if you're doing something different, name it something different. I remember opening a dashboard, and we had conversion on the dashboard, and it was just called conversion. There was 4 different numbers. I was like, well, what is this? And they're like, well, this is the level of granularity that our sales team wants to look at, this is what our finance team wants to look at, and this is what our leadership, and it's looking at different levels of finance based off of when coupons are added, or whether or not we've taken out marketing expenses. But they're all just calling it the same thing. So it was a very quick, easy fix. Everyone started fighting about which one was right, which one was wrong. We didn't really need to have that argument. We just need to rename a couple things. And so now everyone's totally happy with the fact we just have 4 different types of conversion and 4 different types of revenue and how that rolls up and why. So and making sure that you have that communication as you're doing those naming conventions is truly important. Also important, as you're making sure for consistency in naming conventions, make very sure that you have consistency within your own dashboard. That can be a common mistake where you've named everything on the dashboard beautifully the same, but then you go into a tooltip or a legend, which is something that often people forget about, and it's not renamed there, and it's maybe called what you originally had it in the code itself, in the underlying information. So make sure to take the time to do that as well. Last piece for naming conventions is when you're actually publishing your dashboard. Make sure you publish it with a name that is consistent with the way you're naming other dashboards, so it's pointing to the actions that it's meant to take. So we have some that are like, this is inventory. This one is looking at retro numbers. Ensuring that it makes sense for the user so that when someone opens it, they're pretty clear about what it is. Also adding descriptions at the time of publishing, as well as tags, can be really helpful as well. Going back to those names, acronyms. Acronyms are great when you're building Tableau dashboards because they allow you to really use a small amount of space really well. Unfortunately, it can also be really confusing for a user, especially a new user. There's nothing worse than opening a dashboard that you're already a bit confused by and then getting into the situation where you don't know what anything actually means on it, and nowhere on the dashboard does it explain what this actually means. So I always think keep the dashboard a little more simple, have a little less on it, and make yourself room to actually add the real actual naming conventions. If you want to use that on the top and maybe in a smaller graph below, you're going to use an acronym for it, then add the acronym where you have the name so that they understand, like, this is this, now I'm in this lower level, this is okay, that matches. And that way you're giving the user, right in one view, the explanation of what that acronym is. From there, if you are going to use acronyms and you don't have room, I always like to provide an appendix page. So I really love this little, I guess not really a meme, cartoon, where it says, like, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man a fish, you feed him for a lifetime. We all know that. But I really like what the fish is saying, which is create a tutorial and he can teach himself. And that's always the best way to go. You don't really want to have to constantly be teaching people over and over again, as mentioned, especially if you move on, every new hire. Okay, let's sit down and run through how this dashboard works. So one thing I like to do is always build an appendix page. So I just do this using an additional worksheet that I put at the end of every one of my dashboards. Name it appendix. Here, this is a space where I'll add a glossary of definitions for all of our metrics, as well as usage instructions, especially if we've done a more in-depth user guide. I'll link out to that. Maybe that's in a G Sheet or something, so just add that link there. And then finally, also really important to add the cadence of the refresh schedule. As I mentioned, people are always wondering, how often is this updated? Is this data up to date? That's probably the #1 question I get from the sales team, probably Slack to me about twice a day. So put it right on the dashboard, have your refresh schedule, and then right below it, actually like have a calculation that's showing when was the last time it was updated. So it should be updated hourly, here was the last time it was updated. So that way they can actually catch if something is wrong. So that's another really helpful way, which obviously you do want them to message you if something is wrong and the dashboard is behind. So now that we've addressed our end user sustainability, let's talk more about how to be sustainable for your own team members. I've seen a lot of dashboards that have been handed over to me that people are like, oh, this is this great thing someone built. And from the user perspective, it looks great. And they say, you know, we just need to recalculate one metric in here. And I open the dashboard, and there's 75 worksheets there. And they're all named really arbitrary things. And there's hundreds of calculated fields, and half of them are using acronyms. And I have no idea where to start. And so the number of times, it kind of makes me sad, but the number of times I've seen really fantastic work by colleagues of mine that have departed literally get thrown in the trash the day they leave because nobody knows how to use it. It's really sad, because that was a lot of energy and resources that the company used in order to build this dashboard, but something went wrong and now nobody knows how to fix it, and it's probably going to take us longer to sort out what's wrong with it than to just start over. And so that can be a big loss and a big waste of time for everyone. So I'm going to share with you, I'm a little OCD, my own personal best practices for the inside of my dashboard, which hopefully somebody can take some advice from. This is an example of a dashboard that I built for our sales team that's a pacing dashboard. And so I have to run many calculations for each of the different KPI metrics that the team is considering. So I use the use of folders to keep organized and keep separated all the calculations for each of my different KPIs. So everything's grouped together in one spot. From there, I used just numbers, as you can see in the measure and dimension shelf here, just to keep things organized for myself to ensure that like what was separated out that were the actual measures, the actual KPIs, were kind of listed at the top. And then at the bottom was more stuff that I had built out for actually like I had to create a bullet chart. So it was really fun. They were dead set on their visualization of having a flow chart. I forget the name of it now. Basically the tear down chart where you have the revenue on one side and then it says all the different factors and it says how it's impacted in the end to what the final one. It's really hard to do in Tableau. It doesn't work very well, and so it took a lot of configuration. So that's what's going on in the bottom there. This chart though, or this overall dashboard, it probably has, I think, 1,500 calculated fields in it that I built within the dashboard. And of that, most of them are kind of the Russian dolls of nested calculations. So it can get very, very complicated when you have to do this. And so this example where you see under measures, under visitors, was just the calculated fields to get to the pacing for visitors. So another great use of numbering here is if you've ever gone into your calculated field section and started typing in a particular other metric you're looking for, you know you get about an inch to see. It doesn't actually pop out the full name. So you only see this kind of cut off version of what the name of something was. This is often why we end up seeing when people build a dashboard, they end up using all these crazy acronyms, is because they're just trying to be able to see it when they're in their shelf or in their calculation. So rather than doing that, what I did is I actually used a very long, verbose explanation of what that actual field was, and I just numbered it, 1.0, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and this was exactly the same as I mentioned. I'm building this for each metric, so it was consistent for every single one. So all I had to type in was visitors, because the word visitors was in all of my metrics, and I could see all my numbers. And then I could type in bookings and see all those numbers. And so it was actually made life really easy when I was setting up all of these calculations, because I just literally wrote the calculation on the side of like, I need 1.7 divided by 1.2 minus this, and so on. And so it just kept it down to a very quick numbered calculation as I was entering it in, and I was able to just pour through and build out these calculations really quickly. This is actually a dashboard I've now passed on. I'm in a new role at HotelTonight now, and I have new analysts that have taken over building this. The first time she opened the dashboard, she looked terrified. There's so many calculations in here. But as I helped her and walked her through correcting when we had just a change in the way we were calculating revenue. And so I walked her through like how this worked. she sort of leaned into it a bit and was like, okay, so now I have to do the exact same thing for all these other ones? I was like, yep, you just need to change this one thing in all these other 5 places. And she came back later and she's like, that was really scary looking, but it's actually really easy to adapt to. And now, 100%, I love it. I'm on a Slack channel with that team, and I see people say, oh, we're making a change in Rabbit, and she's like, I got it, no problem, all set. Nobody has asked me a question since. So that, to me, is success, if you're able to pass that off to another team member, and not only are they willing to take it on, but they feel okay about it. So beyond actually within your dashboard and making sure that you've set it up for success, that it's clean and organized, you also want to make sure that your data set is. I'm sure there's a lot of probably varying ways that people are pulling in data in this room right now. I can only speak from my perspective, which is our team uses SQL. When we first started out, we were just writing custom SQL into the actual dashboard itself. In the end, we had a very small team and data engineers that didn't all have Tableau access. So that's something to consider. So I went on vacation and one of the dashboards broke, and they couldn't go in to actually download the dashboard to even try to fix it. And it was something in the code that they knew had broken because they had changed and made a duplicative field name in the database, and so we needed to change it. That being said, we made the decision to pull everything out. And we set up our tables, we set up views within Snowflake, set them up for the refresh on the ETL, and then we just did a direct select star from in order to get our data into the dashboard itself. That was our method. If you're not going to do that and you want to keep your SQL in your dashboard, or you're using Excel spreadsheet, just make that information shareable in some way. Before we actually ended up taking the step to move everything into the ETL, we just had a queries folder that we had in GitHub, and we would just share. These are all the analytical queries in a folder that was named whatever our particular dashboard was. Just important to just make sure you're sharing your information. How did you get those numbers? Where did you pull it in from? If you're doing it from a data pull from some other system like Teradata, and you're just downloading it and getting your Excel spreadsheet, then save the spreadsheet and then save written on the top of it, where did you pull that from and how did you pull it and what was the date that you pulled it. And so those are all the kinds of pieces of information you want to make sure that the end user, that they can replicate what you did and make their life a bit easier, and that they can access it. So, other just quick things if you are using code, I always recommend add notations to the code. If there's a section where you're calculating how revenue is, just write that this is where I'm calculating revenue, this is where I'm calculating conversion. Really help out your team when they're trying to look through probably something that's like 800 lines long to get a quick idea of what that is, because if they know, hey, I just need to fix something went wrong with revenue, they can glance and go, okay, here's revenue. That's what I need to fix. Also on that note, make sure that if you're naming something in your code, that it's consistent with what you've named it in the dashboard. This is another big, probably, I wouldn't say failure, but something I've seen other team members of mine do in the past is they name something really wonky or like short acronym-y in their code, because that's what kind of their work is the way they view it. And then in the dashboard for the user, they've renamed it something else. And so you actually have to click in and click on description, and it's like 15 clicks to get to what was the original name of this back on the data source. And so save people the trouble of having to go through that nightmare of what was connected where. Name things consistent on both sides, data source end and the front end. So now let's talk a little bit about rollout strategy. You've built out this dashboard. Hopefully it's working, it's fantastic, your team members are bought in. Oh, and one other final note. With that organization, remember the way you organize something doesn't always work for everyone else. Take that moment and have one of your team members audit it and make sure it actually makes sense to other people, because it might not. Going back to the point of bringing in other people, this is probably the most important part of your rollout strategy. It's very important to get and select very strong product advocates. So, what are product advocates? Product advocates are people who are going to be your front line to sell your product. And these are salespeople, so they're good at it. So you want to use them for this. I like to, again, very much like the user groups and testing, use some of the same people that came from your user groups, maybe not all of them, but choose people that are, again, varying levels of background and experience, from different areas and regions of the country or organization. But the number one thing is pick kind of the loud people. The people who are going to get out there and actually talk about it. You don't really want to choose like the shy person who's not going to tell anyone like, hey, this looks really cool. You really want that person who's going to get out there and be loud about it and say, this is amazing. I just brought this to my partner. It was really, really cool. And they're going to be a great group to also use as your final user group in a close, kind of more closed sessions to actually go through an iteration process. And the iteration process sometimes can seem really painful. It's not always something somebody wants to do because you've built this dashboard, you put all this energy into it, and there tends to be an aversion to, I really don't want to go show people and then have them rip it apart and tell me all the things wrong with it. Because it can be a little disheartening, especially if you've worked really hard on something. I had an example when going back to that same product report that I was building for the hotel company, or hotel organizations. I wanted to get some product feedback, and at this point I actually wanted to get some product feedback from the hotels themselves. So I reached out to my product advocates from my own sales team and said, hey, can you set me up some meetings with hotels in New York? And I was very explicit that I wanted 4 meetings a day, all in the morning, and I wanted my afternoons free. And so we set this up for Monday through Friday. So already kind of fun, because I got to fly back to Boston, or back to New York and visit my family in Boston, so always nice when you can get a free trip home on the company. But really what I wanted to do is go and meet people who are not just in San Francisco, because I was already based out of the San Francisco office chatting with some hoteliers there, so I wanted people with a very different perspective. The reason why I set up the meetings in the morning and not in the afternoon is what I would do every day is every morning I'd go to my 4 meetings, I'd take all these notes, find out what were these changes people wanted, and then I'd spend my afternoon actually implementing them. And so I would just work all afternoon and put through all those changes to the dashboard. And then day 2, I would go in and ask more questions and show them this new version of the dashboard, get more feedback on that. Again, that evening, go back and make the changes. So in 5 days, in a very compressed period of time, I was able to go through 5 different versions of a dashboard and have a really beautiful product at the end. Beyond that, we actually got to have some user feedback testing at the time that our product advocates ended up using to actually sell it to the other team members of, hey, we just showed these hoteliers and he ended up loving it so much, he actually changed the rates for tonight based off that data. And so to be able to have your advocates have some real voices and real true examples of how these actually are driving business forward can be really, really helpful. So again, these product advocates, their sales team, they can speak the sales team language. This is where you also want to put them to work. They should write your user guides, not you. Personally, I despise writing user guides. I find that to be really boring and not usually the best use of my time. Your product advocates have been working with you from the beginning. They know this dashboard in and out. But more importantly, as I mentioned, they know how to speak your sales team's language. So having them be the people to actually go through and write this out is going to be hugely helpful for you. Again, like I mentioned for New York, have them set up training sessions. Have them set them up with outside partners, but also with your internal partners, because you will need to do a rollout and you will need to do some training sessions. This isn't just to take this off your plate. There's actually a real purpose of why you want to have them set this up, which is they understand the cadence of the work schedule of the sales team better than you do. So you might look at everyone's Outlook calendars and say, everybody's free on Tuesday. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the day that they're supposed to be heads down calling all of their partners. So having those people who are in that world setting up the timing, they're going to know when the best time is and what groups to put together and what would make the most sense. So let them play secretary a bit. It's actually quite helpful for everyone. After the rollout, they're also going to be, as I mentioned, your frontline defense in the end. They've been with you in this. They're going to be able to help with any troubleshooting or questions that the team might have and be the people who are known as the experts on this dashboard. Also really fantastic to use them to help prioritize feedback and iteration requests that are going to come in the future. But, as I mentioned, most importantly, their number one job is to get the team on board. You want to highly encourage this. Make sure, ask them regularly, hey, have you been telling people about the dashboard? Have you been telling them how cool it is? I mean, this is a moment to self-promote because it's not really as much for you as if they use it, hopefully, if you've built it right, you're going to drive some results for your team, and you want to make sure that you're easing that stress of the aversion that the team might have. So now let's get into life of the release. First question is, you've launched it. Are you done? Absolutely not. You still have a long roadmap ahead of you after the release. There's going to be a lot of questions. Just because you've released your dashboard and you know that your product advocates know everything about it, that doesn't mean the team does. And there's going to be 200 members or 400 or however many your sales team is that are going to have a lot of questions about this dashboard. They're also maybe going to find things that you missed when you did bug bashing and that are actually truly issues with the dashboard itself. So there's a couple things you want to do to mitigate this from the get-go. I personally don't like to receive 500 emails a day or text messages, so I set up a Slack channel. That's the internal tool that we use at my company. Maybe you use Google Hangouts or something, but basically some way that you can set up a channel where everyone can see the other team members' questions and considerations about this dashboard. And so by having this place, at first, of course, I was answering most of the questions. So people would post a question, I would go in and respond. And then I really encouraged my product advocates, like, hey guys, you're also the leaders for this. You know this dashboard better than anybody else. Jump in there, answer questions. And they all started to get excited about it because now they actually got to their own bosses and leadership, really portray themselves as, I'm an expert on this, I know this. And so they got really excited about it. And so the next time I opened my phone in the morning and looked and saw 77 Slack messages and I started to panic, what I realized is every single one of the questions that had come up had been answered by my different product advocates, and I didn't actually have to go in and answer them that day, which is a huge relief. From there, that's how to handle questions. I would handle actual feedback and iteration requests kind of differently. Feedback is extremely important. We always want to make our dashboards better, and we also want to know if something's broken. What we did at HotelTonight is I set up a G sheet. I have a G sheet that has a tab for every single one of the products that we have. And we just have one column saying, enter your name, enter what is the type of problem. Is it broken? Is it confusing? Is something missing? And then we have them add screenshots, links to views. I always ask for links to the direct views themselves. It just saves a lot of time if you don't have to replicate an issue. And then we have an upvote section as well. And so we always encourage, if you're going to put something on there, glance through and read your other colleagues and see if maybe the problem's already been reported. So once we have this great prioritization sheet, this is again where I'm going to lean on my product advocates who know so well, usually choose one leader at this point. Say, okay, you're really in charge of prioritization. I need you to then tell me what needs to get fixed. So now I'm not monitoring this every day. Like I would go in on Mondays and kind of take a quick peek. I'd have a 15-minute call with my head product advocate and say, what do you guys think is the most important? What's really on your team? What are you hearing the most chatter about? What should we fix first? And then that would really help for not feeling so overwhelmed with the amount of feedback and requests that are coming in. So finally, now that you have all of this in place, the last thing is you're always a work in progress. Every dashboard that I ever launched for my team, one of the best ways that I've gotten them to really get on board with what I'm building is I launch everything as a version. So the first dashboard I send, I always put V1 next to it. It's a very simple thing, but it gives people the confidence that if there's something missing, if there's something that they don't like about it, that they can give feedback, they're going to be heard, and there's a future iteration coming. And that maybe the next one, if they're loud enough, will include what they're looking for. So always keep that in mind. So final takeaways, again, just going back to the beginning, when you're looking at your stakeholders, make sure that you're looking at all of your stakeholders and really focusing on your end user, because that's the person who's going to be the most important at the end of the day. Making sure that you're bringing those stakeholders into your collaborative discovery period. I know this can be a little hard to give up, the design control to bring other people in and hear their opinions, but at the end of the day, it's going to make the product better and more user-friendly. Connecting to only actionable and prioritizing the highest impact actions that you can, keeping your dashboard from being overly cluttered, being transparent about all your content decisions, being clear on why and involving people in that choice of actually removing things. And then, of course, keeping your actual data sets and dashboards clean, making sure that you're setting up for sustainability for your end user as well as your internal users in your own team, and working with your product advocates. So thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed my session. Maybe there's one bullet point somewhere that you can take away with you. As I mentioned, I will be up here for about 15 minutes or so to answer questions. And of course, please complete, if you enjoyed the session, complete the survey in the mobile app. If you hated it, I think it might be not working today, so don't worry about it. But thank you guys very much.